Lost on a deadly alien world, he followed her, not knowing if she'd save him or betray him rain slick. Metal groaned under Ethan Cross's boots as he pried himself free from the wreckage. Smoke hissed in the damp air, mixing with the strange, floral scent of the alien jungle beyond. The crash had shredded half the hull, scattering his supplies across the mud. His wrist display blinked weakly, warning him that comms were dead. Somewhere in the distance, something howled low and guttural. He forced his legs forward, past twisted vines glowing faintly in the dim light. The trees here weren't trees at all, but living columns of muscle-like fiber, pulsing with slow, rhythmic light. Every instinct told him to stay near the wreck, but movement ahead caught his eye. She stepped from the shadows, like something out of a dream or a warning. Tall, easily a head higher than him, with skin that shimmered between violet and gold, as the faint bioluminescence played over her curves. Her silver hair spilled down her back in soft waves, catching the glint of alien moonlight. The short, battle-slashed dress she wore clung to her slim frame, bearing long legs that seemed sculpted for speed and grace. Her emerald eyes locked on him, sharp but curious. A slender, curved blade rested easily in her hand, its edge humming. Faintly, she said something soft, lilting syllables he didn't understand, but her tone carried both warning and interest. "I'm not here to fight," Ethan said, raising his hands slowly. His voice felt small in the dense alien air. She tilted her head, studying him, as though weighing his worth in a glance. Then, with a flick of her blade, she gestured for him to follow. He hesitated, but a deep roar echoed from behind the predators. "Voice." She didn't wait for his answer, turning sharply and moving through the undergrowth with fluid, silent strides. Ethan followed, stumbling to keep pace. Her scent wild and sweet lingered in the damp air between them. The deeper they went, the more the jungle seemed to bend around her presence, creatures retreating into shadow. They reached a hollow carved into the side of a massive, ancient ruin, its walls etched with glowing symbols. She motioned him inside, her expression unreadable. Only when they were hidden from the open jungle did she step closer, close enough for him to see the faint, shifting constellations across her skin. She spoke again, slower this time, and though he still didn't understand her words, there was something in her eyes, an unspoken promise that she had no intention of leaving him to die for the first time since the crash. Ethan felt something he hadn't expected to find here. Safety. Or maybe it wasn't safety at all. Maybe it was the beginning of something else entirely. Dense mist curled around the entrance of the ruin, muffling the jungle's restless sounds. Ethan sat against the cold stone wall, trying to slow his breathing. The alien woman moved with quiet precision, scanning the shadows beyond their shelter as if she could hear threats he couldn't. The faint glow of the wall etchings painted her skin in shifting gold and violet, like firelight dancing over water. When she finally turned back to him, she knelt with an almost feline grace, her eyes locked on his face. She touched her chest lightly. "Lyara," she said, her voice soft but clear. The sound of her name lingered, as though the stone itself wanted to keep it. "Ethan," he replied, pressing a hand to his own chest. She repeated it once, testing the shape of the human word in her mouth, and it sounded different better. Somehow, she reached to her side and drew a small fruit from a pouch, slicing it neatly with her curved blade. The scent was intoxicating sweet and sharp, like citrus warmed in sunlight. She held a slice toward him. For a moment, he hesitated, but her eyes, green and unblinking, never wavered. He took it, the cool flesh pressing into his palm, and bit. The taste burst across his tongue, like nothing he'd known before, sweet and burning at once. She watched him carefully, as if his reaction mattered. A faint smile touched her lips. Just a flicker, but it was enough to shift the air between. Them. Outside, a distant roar cut through the mist. Ethan tensed, but Liara only rose to her feet, her blade ready. She made a motion with her hand, wait here, before stepping toward the entrance. Every instinct screamed at him to follow, yet something about her movements told him she wasn't. Leaving. She was protecting. He caught himself staring at her silhouette in the glowing mist, the curve of her hip, the line of her shoulders, the way her silver hair shifted with every breath of wind. There was strength there, but something else too, loneliness. Maybe. When she returned, her eyes searched his face for fear, then softened slightly when she found none. Without a word, she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The heat of her body radiated through the cool, damp air. Neither spoke. There was no common language between them, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with things they didn't yet have the words to say. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew the moment wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about her. Mist lifted from the jungle floor like breath from a sleeping animal, and Ethan woke to the first clean silence since the crash. Liara was already up, tracing the glowing etchings with the blunt side of her blade, lips moving as if reciting something half-remembered. When she noticed him, she pointed at a symbol, 3 curved lines meeting in a sunburst, and said a word that sounded like home, then touched her chest. Another symbol, a spiral within a spiral, and she tapped the stone twice, then his chest, watching to see if he understood. He repeated the sound back clumsily. She winced at his accent, laughed quietly, and tried again, voice softer this time, like water smoothing a stone. They ate the fruit she'd foraged, the fragrance bright, and sharp, and waking something pleasant in him that coffee never had. He tried to offer her a protein bar in return. She bit it, frowned, then nodded as if grading a brave but failing attempt. Outside, droplet light drifted through the canopy. The jungle didn't creak. There were no trees here, not truly, but the living columns pulsed, shimmering in shared rhythms that felt like heartbeats. It should have been eerie. With her near, it wasn't. She signaled that they should move. The mist meant predators hunted low. He checked his salvaged pack, multi-tool, flare wedge, 2 patches of hull foam, cracked medjol, a single micro-drone with half a battery, and the battered knife he barely knew how to use. Liara watched him inventory like a commanding officer, assessing a green recruit, then nodded curtly. He smiled despite himself. In a lifetime of following procedures, he found her untranslatable certainty steadying. They slipped back into the jungle, hugging the living walls where bioluminescence ran like veins. Lyra's gait changed when she moved in the open longer. Quieter, the dress clasp riding at her hip catching light in glints. The world had edges with her in it. This path safe, that one death. Twice she stopped him with a flat palm, without looking back, and twice a ripple of something unseen crossed their route. Like the shadow of a bird with too many wings, they reached a natural corridor where the ground dropped into a basin of black, glassy mud. At its center grew a lattice of thin, singing reeds, vibrating as if touched by wind, though the air was still. Liara signed small, careful, and began to cross, balancing on stone outcroppings that peaked like vertebrae through the muck. Ethan followed, keeping his weight light on his heels like the time his grandfather had taught him to walk a frozen creek. Halfway across, the reeds fell silent. Lyra's eyes flicked to the right. The mud bulged. The bulge exhaled, it rose like a forest lifting its head, a low, wide creature the color of wet midnight, mouth a triptych of folding plates lined with grinding teeth. The thing had no visible eyes, only a frilled crown that opened and closed, tasting the air in slow petals. Ethan choked on his breath. Lyra's blade sang out of reflex, her stance narrowing. The creature shifted toward the sound. Ethan's training, such as it was, had nothing to say about mud titans. But physics still worked here. He slipped the flare wedge from his belt and clicked it alive. The flare hissed to white blue, lighting the basin in harsh noon. The frilled crown recoiled, then angled toward him with terrible curiosity. "Hey," he whispered hoarsely, because humans are built to talk to anything that might listen. "Over here, ugly." He threw the flare as far left as he could manage. It arced and hissed into a spitting rock pool. The creature pivoted with a wet lurch and struck with a flare hit, its mouth plates smashing the pool in a spray of steam. Liara didn't waste the heartbeat. She took 3 long steps and leapt, clearing a swath of sucking mud, landing on a rib of stone near Ethan with a grunt. The mud drank the sound. The creature tasted the steam, oriented, and lunged again closer to them now. Second flare? Liara breathed, a single human word falling out of her with a strange, careful precision. "Only had one," he said, guilt punching him. She glanced at him, quick and assessing. Then her gaze dropped to the canister strapped under his pack flap. Hull foam. Expands on contact with air. Sets in seconds. He saw the plan the instant she did. She snatched the canister, snapped it open with her teeth, and flicked the nozzle toward the creature's crown. Ethan grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he said, the engineering brain finally catching up with the animal fear. On its intake. Timing. She understood timing. Together, they watched the crown ripple. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale now. She pressed the valve. A rope of white foam shot across the black mud. Ethan kicked the stone into the fringe of the frill the creature, flared wider in reflex, and the foam hit the intake at the perfect angle. It vanished inside. For one long, elastic breath, nothing happened. Then the frill convulsed, the crown clamping. Opening, clamping foam blooming within like a sick flower. The creature thrashed, mouth plates grinding against its own stiffening intake, body sinking into the basin as the foam expanded, hardening into a honeycomb that locked its breathing. Organ shut. It didn't die not immediately, but it stopped moving, quivering in place, its huge weight knitting itself to the mud. Liara and Ethan didn't wait to see what came next. They ran, feet hitting stone, lungs burning. Only when the living columns of the jungle closed behind them, and the air smelled like crushed limes again, did they stop. Liara braced hands to knees and laughed the surprised, fierce laugh of a warrior who expected death and shook its hand instead. She turned to him and touched his shoulder, fingers lingering. "Clever," she said, the word half hers, half his. And fully something new they were making together. They found a narrow cave and a cliff-etrified route and waited out the afternoon while the predators hunted. Liara cleaned her blade with calm, practiced movements. Ethan inspected the foam canister and grimaced at the empty gauge. "I'll scavenge more," he said out of habit, then realized how absurd that promise sounded. She tilted her head, reading. The apology underneath. With 2 fingers, she tapped the center of his chest. "Stay," she said, and then slowly, trying the shape of hope in a foreign mouth. "Alive." He wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, he said the only true thing at hand. "Your name," he said, and touched his own voice box. "Liara." She nodded. He pointed to himself. "Ethan." She smiled, and something low and warm slid between his ribs like a secret shared dot as dusk bled up from the ground. They made a small fire in a nook of rock, feeding it bits of desiccated reed Liara judged safe to burn. The flames painted the cave mouth in amber. She sat with one knee drawn up, dress riding high on a thigh, banded with faint iridescent markings that shifted when she breathed, as if skin held its own quiet aurora. He looked away to be decent, and found himself staring at her blade instead, the metal humming in the fire's heat. She watched the way he watched, and made a small sound amused, maybe, or just interested in his interest. He risked a smile. "Sorry," he said. I've never seen anything like you." She touched a hand to her chest, then gestured to the world outside. "Same," she whispered. They slept in alternating light doses. In his turn awake, Ethan watched the way the shadows held her. Even asleep, there was a poise to her, a strength that didn't go slack. From time to time, words slipped from her in dream, too soft to catch. The sound made him ache in a place he'd guarded for a long time. Night loosened. At first light, she woke with a small intake of breath, as if surfacing from deep water. She said something lengthier then, voice low, melodic, a story poured into. A bowl that could not yet hold it. She touched the cave wall, where mineral gleamed through rock, drew a line, then another, and motioned to him. He understood a frame, if not the picture. With his broken stylus, he drew the shape of a small starship and a triangle for a mountain. She stared at the crude little icons like they were miracles, then laughed until she had to cover her mouth. He exaggerated a bow. She tapped his shoulder with her knuckles, the gesture half affection, half reprimand. For the first time since the crash, life felt like something more than not dying. They moved at mid-morning. The jungle brightened with sourceless light, and Liara took them downslope, following a thread of colder air. The ruins there grew thicker and stranger, arches grown inside arches, floors that resonated when stepped on, sending faint tones through the ground. Liara slowed near a doorway whose threshold was marked with the same sunburst she'd shown him in the cave. Her breath hitched. She stepped inside like a child entering a long-locked room. The chamber sang when they crossed it. Not loud, a whisper of harmonics that set Ethan's molars tingling. Liara approached a wall and laid her palm against a panel. Color bled under her skin, the violet gold brightening, and the panel answered, glyphs waking word by word, a constellation of meaning that made his scalp tighten. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was water in them. She turned to him and touched the center of her collarbone, where a thin, almost invisible thread of scar tissue ran like a fine necklace. Under her skin, she spoke a string of soft syllables, then one he recognized, Liara. She added a second word and repeated it, then pointed to the sunburst. She said the second word again and flattened her hand over the symbol, even without entry syntax. He understood, not just Liara. Liara of sunburst, Liara of home, Liara of line. Royalty? He said, half teasing, half making a shape to see if it fit. She didn't understand the word, but she understood the weight he put on it. She looked away, jaw tightening, and for the first time he saw not the warrior, not the savior, but the exile, the line that had been cut. Outside, air pressure shifted. Lyra's head snapped up. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward a low arch. He heard it a second later, a distant, mechanical thrum, too regular to be animal. He knew that. Sound in his bones? Not rescue. The wrong pitch, the wrong rhythm. Scavengers, raiders, or worse, prospectors with men and guns and a habit of calling anything that breathed asset. They sprinted to a balcony cut in a spine of stone. Through the living lattice he saw them, a spindly shuttle skimming the canopy, 2 drone skiffs on outriders, their searchlights cutting pale wounds in the green. His crashed ship must have pinged someone after all. Liara pulled him back, eyes flaring. She didn't need language to tell him what she felt. All at once he understood that whatever had pushed her tribe out of these halls might wear engines, not claws. He inventoried on instinct. Drone, half battery, medjol, multi-tool, 2 charges left on his effectors. The micro-drone could carry a payload the size of his thumb and project a decoy ping if he hot-wired the radio to it. They needed misdirection, not firepower. He set down his pack and worked, tools moving with a calm that surprised him. Liara crouched beside him, her body close, enough that he could feel the heat of her skin. She handed him things before he knew he needed them, watching his fingers, learning his craft like he'd learned her footsteps. The radio hissed to brittle life. He soldered a bypass with the multi-tool's microtorch, sweat pattering off his forehead. 30 seconds, he whispered, and felt ridiculous for whispering until he noticed she was whispering too. He launched the drone. It scrambled into the light, a black mote against a washed sky, and began to sing his crash beacon at a frequency a bored corporate pilot would recognize and chase. The skiffs peeled off like hounds scenting blood, driving away from the ruins, and toward a dead gulch he'd mapped on his trek, the place where the mud titan would still be hardening into a monument to bad decisions. He grinned without joy. Go get stuck, he breathed. The shuttle stayed. It banked, nose dipping toward the ruins, searchlight brightening to an accusation. Someone aboard was more curious than lazy. Ethan's heart clutched. Liara touched his arm, her face gone stone. She slipped away, a shadow, peeling from a shadow. He reached to catch her and missed only air. She reappeared on a ledge above the arch, poised like a drawn bow, a length of woven filament in her hands. He didn't know where she'd gotten it, or how long she'd had it. He knew what a snare looked like. The shuttle drifted lower, its belly. Guns dormant, pilot lazy enough to trust a quiet sky. That's the thing about quiet skies, Ethan thought. They belong to someone. The filament sang when Liara cast it. It caught a protruding strut as the shuttle drifted through the arch. She braced the line on a carved splice, muscles in her arms tightening like cables. The filament bit. The strut snapped with a sound like a gigantic reed cracking. The pilot yanked the nose up. The sudden lift sheared a sensor mast. Panels clanged open like startled mouths. Ethan didn't watch the pilot recover. He grabbed his multi-tool, ran to the secondary glyph panel, and jammed an improvised wedge into the pulse channel he'd seen vibrating under Lyra's hand. The chamber sang back loud this time, a harmonic that hit the shuttle's undercarriage. Sensors like a hammer. The belly guns jolted awake and shut down in the same breath, error lights blooming. Now, he shouted, trusting she would understand the tone, if not the word. Liara yanked the filament free and flung a fist-sized stone into the engine intake. The shuttle lurched. Metal screamed. The pilot chose air over pride. The craft clawed up through the lattice, leaving a hail of panels behind. It didn't crash. It got the hell out, trailing smoke, and the skiffs returned late, confused noses. Swinging in wide, foolish arcs, Ethan and Liara lay flat, pressed into the glyphs. He felt her rapid breathing on his cheek. They didn't move until the sky went quiet enough to hear the living walls again. When they finally looked at each other, the shared shock burned down to something warmer. Fear had braided itself with trust, and trust with the beginning of allegiance. Liara pressed her forehead lightly to his, gesture that landed on him like a benediction and an oath. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. She said his name like it meant place, not person. He closed his eyes and let the meaning touch him. They didn't go back to the balcony. They went deeper into the ruins, below the chambers that sang, into halls where the air tasted like cold metal and old rain. Here, the glyphs didn't glow, they remembered. Liara held her blade up, and its low hum woke pale lines along the walls, maps, histories, warnings. He couldn't read them, but he could read her face. Sorrow, anger that had been sharpened and sheathed. A soft, stubborn hope dotted a junction where 3 halls met. The floor sloped into a circular room lined with vents. The air was different, drier, colder. Liara stepped in and flinched as if someone had called her childhood name. She moved to a central pedestal, and held her palm over its face. Lights fanned outward like wings. Above the pedestal, a small, broken image formed. A city of arches like these, but intact, full of tall figures with luminous skin. Children ran. Musicians played a long, ribboned instrument that looked like wind made visible. Then the image shuddered, tore, and reformed into ships lifting against a reddening sky while drones gathered like crows. Lyra's hand closed into a fist. She whispered a single word and tapped her collarbone scar. He didn't need a translation to know what had been taken. He showed her the battery levels on his gear. She showed him a cache hidden under a cracked panel. Dried leaf cakes that smelled like toasted nuts, a coil of that clever filament, a flat stone embedded with tiny barbs that clung to metal when pressed. Survivors leave themselves gifts. He added his medjol and a ration bar to the cache offering to the room, or to the future version of them who might come back hungry and hurt. They made their camp there that night, under the ghost of the city, the storm that came up from. The lowlands struck the ruins like a drum, rain carving nails down the stone. Wind chased itself down the halls and went out laughing. In the intervals where the world caught its breath, they spoke in their broken bridge of languages. He taught. Her engine, friend, danger, and safe. She taught him words he couldn't quite hear, their sounds sliding and turning like fish, until one caught. A name for the light in her skin that responded to touch and music. He said it back. She startled, and smiled as if he'd pronounced a secret correctly. They ate close, knees bumping, shoulders touching, and then not. When she shivered, he unzipped his emergency thermal liner and offered it. She took it carefully, as if taking a small, meaningful animal into her arms, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked instantly, achingly human like that. When? She lifted the edge and gestured for him to join. He hesitated a heartbeat too long, then sat beside her. The liner held both of their breaths in a small, warm weather different from the storms. His shoulder pressed her long, bare arm. She didn't pull away. She rested her head lightly against his, the way to question without pressure. Tomorrow, he said softly, almost to himself. Northridge, better line of sight. Maybe I can boost a signal. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the cadence of planning, of refusing a world that tries to reduce you to reaction. She made a sound he hadn't heard from her yet. Something like agreement wrapped in pride. Sleep took them in gentle increments. At some hour that no clock could find, thunder rolled through the chamber, and the city's broken image flickered, casting a pale glow over their faces. In that half-light, he dreamed of a family he didn't have, living in a place that looked like these arches, translated into wood and glass and laughter. Dawn came with the smell of wet stone and the slow, steady drip of water from the vents. Ethan woke to find her watching him openly. The way wild creatures watch sunrise. He touched the scar at her collarbone, a gesture so bold his hand shook, and drew back before he could misstep. Who hurt you? He asked, knowing the question was larger than the mark. She understood the intent, if not the words. She lifted his hand and set it gently back against her skin, over the scar, over the place where her pulse beat strong and fast. She said a name like a knife, 2 syllables, hard-edged, and then another that carried sorrow like a perfume. She drew a diagonal slash in the air, then a circle. He tried to echo the shape with his fingers on his own chest. Enemy, council, law. She nodded once, eyes bright, and then deliberately took his fingers and moved them to the left, over the softer place where bone gave way to heart. You, she said, the word all breath. She tapped that spot. Here. He didn't kiss her. He didn't do anything so final as that. He let his forehead rest against hers again, and the silence between them filled with all the patience he had been forced to learn in a hard life. Her breath steadied against his mouth. The city's ghost hummed a harmony neither of them knew the words for. They left at mid-morning, climbing toward the ridge through a wound in the ruins where the living columns had poured in and grown into a cathedral of soft light. High above, the sky looked freshly laundered and mean. Ethan rigged the micro-drone's remaining battery into a directional antenna, using filament as a tension brace and a carved metal disc as a crude dish. He set it on a ledge that hummed under his palm and angled it toward the piece of sky where the satellites should be. No pings answered. He didn't expect any. He tried anyway. Liara ranged outward, scouting their perimeter, returning every few minutes to touch his shoulder, give a hand sign, show him a sprig he was allowed to step on, and one he was absolutely not. Twice she drew him into stillness, and they watched a herd of thin-limbed grazers step through shafts of light like dancers. Once she crouched and let one sniff her fingers. Its tongue left a shining track on her skin. When it moved off, she rubbed a line of dirt where it had touched, as if erasing a temporary name. By noon, the air went thin and prickly. Storm again? Ethan asked, more to hear his own voice than out of any expectation of answer. Liara's chin lifted. She tasted the wind with a parted mouth, then shook her head. Not a storm. The sky thrummed. The shuttle returned with friends. 3 this time. Not corporate. Military gray hulls with scarred serials and the bored malice of men who had used their machines for small, sharp things. One peeled away and circled wide, cutting them off from the lower paths. Another dropped a pod that unfolded into a skeletal listening tower. The third simply hovered, patient as a hawk, airing anything below to pretend it covered. Lyra's face went still. She drew a mark on the stone with the flat of her blade, 2 parallel lines and a third crossing them. Her people's sign for danger, or the specific shape of these intruders, or both. Ethan's palm found the wall behind him, as if he could borrow courage from its old strength. Pulse up, lungs tight, brain quickening the way it did, whenever. The universe said no with a straight face. We can't run, he said, and she caught the meaning from the way his body said it. She touched his cheek once, eyes clear. Then she said a word he hadn't heard yet, a small word, the sound of a rope knotting. He said it back, clumsy but trying. Her mouth softened. He moved like a man who had spent years fixing what other people broke and now had to break something on purpose. He rerouted the antenna, reprogrammed the micro-drone to broadcast not a distress ping but an angry echo. The same frequency as the listening tower but dirty, full of static and teeth, a false reflection that would tell the tower it was hearing itself from very far away. Liara watched, learned, and then used the filament and barbed stones to lace 2 high arches into one living trap that would drop when weight passed beneath. They waited with the patience of people who are too busy to be afraid. The first shuttle took the bait, nose tipping toward the false echo. It slid under the trapped arch. Liara jerked the filament. Stone shifted. The arch didn't fall, it drifted down on old, careful braces, and then tilted just enough to kiss the shuttle's flank. A kiss from a mountain is still a bruise. The hull screeched. The pilot overcorrected. The nose clipped the living column. The column bled light and curved inward, gently but irresistibly, pressing the shuttle into the stone like a teacher pinning a child's hand above a miscast sentence. The second shuttle spat drones like seeds. Ethan sent the angry echo spinning at them. The drones went blind, chasing their own noise. Liara sprang, blade a streak. The third shuttle started to climb, unwilling to die for curiosity. No one gets paid enough to be brave on a day like this. In the small, ringing quiet that followed, Ethan realized his hands were shaking and his mouth tasted like copper. Liara stood breathing hard. gaze sweeping for the next thing that would ask something of her. When nothing immediate raised its head, she turned to him. Slowly, as if giving gravity extra time to notice, he stepped into her space. She let him. He rested his forehead to her temple, and her blade hand lowered until the tip of the metal touched the stone with a sound like a bell swallowed. Together, he said, and she didn't need the word to agree. They dismantled the angry echo and packed their traps, leaving the arches as they had found them. Before they left the ridge, Liara returned to the symbol of the sunburst carved near the path and placed her fingers against it. She whispered something that might have been apology, or promise, or just her name. Then she walked away without. Looking back, they descended by a different route, one that corkscrewed through a seam where the living walls had grown into each other and left a narrow, green throat of passage. The air there smelled of crushed mint and rain iron. At the bottom, a stream ran quick and cold. Liara knelt and cupped water to her mouth, then offered her wet palm to him as if offering a gift, not the water, but the touch. He drank from her, hand and felt the shape of his life shifting under him like earth, learning a new river. When they finally stopped, it was in a small bowl of earth, ringed with roots and draped with a curtain of hanging vines. The storm had rinsed the world clean. A scatter of tiny flying things, half insect, half seed, hung under the leaves like lanterns. Liara crouched and traced a map in the damp soil. Their path, the ridge, the ruins, an X for his crash site, a line of mountains to the north, and beyond them she marked an oval and drew lines radiating from it the sun. She touched the oval and said a word that sounded like haven. Then she touched him, then the line of mountains, then the oval again. Long, he said, and stretched the word out with his hands like dough. She nodded, eyes bright with that stubborn hope. They built a shelter there for the night low, discreet, its roof a patchwork of leaves, and the thermal liner stretched carefully between forked branches. He rigged a gutter to catch rainwater. That fell from a canopy seam. She showed him how to twist lengths of vine into rope that didn't creak when stressed. When the sky went from washed steel to dark blue, they sat facing each other on either side of the little fire and told stories in their incompatible tongues, each leaning toward the other to steal meaning from the eyes and the hands. He told her about the first engine he ever took apart, a family car that had rattled when it should have purred, a father who had been too tired to fix a thing, and a boy too stubborn to accept that. He told her about the long, empty stations he'd worked on, where stars were something other people got to see. She told him about learning to run the arches as a child, feet bare, skin glowing to the rhythm of the old songs, elders laughing when she missed a turn and landed in a pile of ferns. She told him, without telling, what it meant to be cut from, a line and left to carry a name by yourself. When the night grew tender, she slid closer and set her palm over his sternum, feeling the beat there. He mirrored the gesture, asking, always asking. She nodded, slow, eyes open, and lowered her forehead to his. They stayed like that, breath to breath, until the fire went to coals. There is a way to begin a love without taking more than is offered. He chose it. She rewarded the choice with the smallest of smiles against his mouth. Not a kiss, not yet. A promise held lightly between them like a moth. He slept without dreams. She woke once in the night and watched his face in the glow of dying. Embers, the lines smoothed by rest, the mouth softened. She reached and traced a line from his temple to his jaw with the back of one finger, as if learning a melody by touch, and then tucked his hand under the thermal where it had slipped free. In the morning, he would not know why his knuckles were. Warm dot when dawn slid through the vines. The jungle smelled of cut lemons. They broke camp and moved north. The path led them through low valleys where the living walls sang in a register too deep to hear, but easy to feel in bones. Midday brought heat and a greater chorus of small, bright things. Lyra showed him a plant that folded into itself when touched and told him, by pantomime and persistence, that the sap could soothe the burning he got when too much of the planet's light kissed his skin. He taught her to secure a coil with a fisherman's knot that would hold under load and loosen when asked respectfully. They skirted a broken field of old pylons, each angled like a question. The metal there had been half-eaten by time and something like hunger. Lyra didn't like the place. Her skin dimmed, and she walked tight, blade tilted outward. He offered his hand without thinking. She took it like a person stepping onto a rope bridge. The mountains loomed by late afternoon great gray backs of ancient creatures sleeping under green crests. The pass she'd drawn was there, a V-shaped bite cut into the ridge. Wind poured through it like cold water. They climbed until their legs burned, then climbed some more. At a shelf not far from the throat of the pass, they stopped, spent and not quite safe. He wanted to push to the other side, where her haven might begin, but the light had gone thin and the wind carried a smell like ozone and iron filings. Lyra touched his lips with 2 fingers and shook her head. Not tonight. He nodded and let himself feel what he felt. Frustration turned quickly to gratitude, because the person telling him no was the one he trusted most in this world. They wedged themselves into a cleft and watched evening lift off the jungle like steam. From here, the ruined city lay under them, like a memory he already loved. He wondered who he'd be on the other side of the pass. He wondered what she'd ask him to be. He had never minded questions without quick answers, until he wanted the answers to have her eyes. She pressed her shoulder against his, and leaned just enough to let him know that wait was a language now. He answered by turning his palm up on the rock between them. A moment later her fingers found his, intertwined, and stayed. They watched the first star find the sky. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The world for an hour agreed to be quiet so 2 people could hear their own hearts. Somewhere beyond the pass lay a haven with a name he couldn't pronounce. Somewhere behind it lay men in ships who would rather break a place than ask it to dance. Between those truths, on a ledge the wind kept sweeping clean, a human and an alien woman sat with their hands twined and decided that tomorrow, again, they would choose each other and whatever that meant next.